Close with One. Today, this is another live session for us to walk into the things that bring people onto calls with you and the things to do natively on the call to create so much trust that they want to work with you. And that might sound like a unicorn, and yet still it's something that's a teachable skill. Today I have Dax Patil as well as Sergio Nelaton. The three of us work together to create that effect, and it's exciting to be here today.
I'm
Well,
excited to have on this call, Mark, and yeah, we have a lot of good things to share. So let's roll.
Happy to be here. And what can people expect from this live? What are we going to be jumping into?
today we're going to jump into some situations where people just don't know what they don't know to create that feeling of magnetism of trust before the call and in the call so that those things actually happen rather than let me just put somebody on a sequence and follow up with them later. And I have an example of that to show, which I'll pull up right now. So I'm going to share my screen and then show something that's kind of specific to a situation. So hopefully you guys see these three scenarios. Scenario one, the close happens at the end of the call, and the faster I drive, the more likely it is I'll get the deal. Have you ever been on a call where it feels like the rep is just going boom, 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 and they're creating no space for the thinking to occur? The passenger in this vehicle is just hanging on for the dear life and wondering, is it safe to jump out of the vehicle, or are we somehow going to arrive a place where I can jump off? It's a scary place, and it's a very real place where almost up to 91% of buyers don't feel like they can think. Have you guys ever experienced that?
So many times, I can't even tell you, right? It's either somebody else is doing it to me, or sometimes we are doing it subconsciously or unconsciously to other people. And that definitely makes you feel like, hey, if I just keep giving them more info, at the end it's going to close. But uh, I feel like the closure happens in between calls, in between the spaces that you give to the prospect to share their problems, to understand and feel understood. Yeah.
Yeah, I second that. I think space is incredibly important. Most of the speaking is, most of the trust is being built when you're listening and asking intentional questions. So the better you can listen and pay attention to what the needs are, the better questions you can ask. And I feel like overall, more trust that you can build with the person you're with.
So, why is it that traditional sales, the salesperson just wants to dominate the call and talk and talk? Like, what's actually behind that?
I think it's the need of the sale. I mean, someone who needs to close the sale or feel like they have full control over the conversation. So maybe at that stage, their perception of control is asking or speaking a lot, speaking more than the person that they're with, sharing as much information as they can. Where, in my opinion, I feel like, and also some experience, um, most of the control is coming from asking the right questions, which only comes from listening with intent. So
I
for
agree with.
me, go ahead. No, I was just gonna end it with, for me, it's like that's why I call it, like Mark, since the beginning, the art of listening, paying attention to what people are saying, and what their motives are, and what direction they're kind of leaning into.
I kind of second that, right? And the other two emotions that I have noticed in this case is one, insecurity or desperation, which is again the same thing where they want to feel like I'll have to close this deal, or a very strong desire to do it very quick and like force it onto somebody. And the second factor I feel, which a lot of salespeople kind of ignore or don't really let that build in themselves when they're selling a product, is the lack of confidence in their product or service that they're selling. If I knew I could solve the biggest AI problems, I will never be pushing it on to somebody else, right? People are going to chase me because I believe in it. I know that what I have is valuable. But if you are working for a company or you are trying to just get a job or trying to sell for a product or a service that you don't really believe or understand, you are going to end up in situations where you're just going to push things onto the prospects and scare them away instead of closing them.
The other part of that too is you might already have a good product, but because you're looking at everyone else out there who's kind of selling something similar, you compare. And I do that sometimes still. I've done it a lot more in the past. And the less time that I spend looking at what everyone else is doing, the less pressure I have on myself during calls in general with people. So I think part of it is kind of removing yourself from the competition. I mean, you want to be aware of what's happening out there and the changes that are being made, but I think it's good to be conscious around what you're picking up from others and how far you're going into comparing your products and services. It's important to be aware of changes and to understand your competition, but you can't diminish your own value because somebody else acquired a different skill set or has a different kind of skill set that maybe in your opinion might be higher, more valuable. You can't let those things kind of hold you back from having conviction on the call, believing in your product. So how do you even do that in the first place? How do you remove yourself, detach yourself from, what everyone else is doing and just focus on what's in front of you?
First and foremost, I always recommend that people like shut off the slides, shut off the script, truly look at the other person in the beginning of the call and let everything else stop. And it's actually really scary to shut all that noise off and then create space, almost like a vacuum where they can walk toward you and say, you're actually letting me think and breathe a little bit here and have space. I often call it like the 90-20 rule, where if you let them speak up to 90% of the time and then think things through, you'll see them walking toward a solution. Now, it might be your solution, or it might be that you're sending them to somewhere else, and yet you're leaving them better off through the entire experience. How does it feel when you join a call and they're helping you rather than kind of crushing you into a decision?
It feels great. I feel like when that happens, you immediately feel like this guy's not here to sell me something, but he's trying to actually solve a real problem. And in today's market, so many people are just trying to sell that you actually get the competitive edge that you were looking for without even trying to get it, right? So yeah, I think that's a byproduct when you start helping people. And another piece that I really like what you said was about, even if it's not me, you can point them to the right direction. If you can do that tomorrow when they need something and you are the right person, you wouldn't even have to make a pitch. They will by default know that this guy is ethical and moral enough to give me the right solution, that if he says this time it's going to be him, it's going to be him. I don't need to second question or look elsewhere.
So if that's the case and people are building trust because you're not pigeonholing them into a specific one path, but just giving them guidance to the best of your ability, then what's the best way to bring in a steady flow of business in the first place? I mean, is it volume in that case because all you're worrying about is just guiding people in the right direction, or is there some component of is there some part of those sales calls where you need to be a little bit more intentional with sharing your service in a way that is actually attractive to them? I don't think those two things bridged properly together, but I guess the question is if we're just guiding people in the right way and building trust, then is it just a volumes game in that case, getting as many people in as we can and a percentage of them actually needing what we have?
I like this question a lot because it's the question of, do we use systems to automate more messages and therefore we're absolutely likely to increase the number of bookings or not? And is it the intentional relational approach? And I just looked at somebody's sequence for about 600 outreaches to people that should have known that person. And of the 600, about 67 said, okay, I'm interested in seeing a link, some information about what it is that you're doing. Guess how many of those 67 actually booked a call?
30%.
I would say lesser, maybe. 0. Wow.
So there was a link that everyone got, those 67 that said, okay, you can send me somewhere. The space that they went to wasn't a space where they could go, oh, wow, I get this. It's really valuable. It didn't go down to the core principles, the first principles of why they even wanted to have a conversation. Unless you bring someone to that emotional space, you're not going to get there. Like, buyers are very emotional. We're all very emotional. Otherwise, we'd have systems do all the closing for us, and then we go, oh, okay, looks like I'm onboarding another one today. That's not really how it works.
I agree, and that would be ideal, right? Systems just closing things, but there has to be a human element and the emotional piece of it. I have a very simple framework, right? So, Sergio, you asked a question that what should we do to increase sales? Should we increase the volume? Should we be more intentional? I have noticed a pattern between some of the biggest businesses and the most successful ones, especially the ones that are sales dependent. They try to build a community of takers. When I say takers, they try to give something of value for free and let as many people take it as they can. If that is scalable, you have a warm set of audience who has already gotten value from what you are providing, and after that it's much easier for you to make a sale or offer even more value, right, which could be a paid or a different type of a model. But I think, like, in today's economy, if you can have a massive community of people who are taking things, that could just be your LinkedIn post, this particular podcast, a book that you might have written, or something else, right? But if people are taking it, they by default value what you're doing, and that engagement is a much more trustable, honest, and a fruitful one, is what I believe.
The genuine piece is really important. I remember being part of a company that had spent, it was about 500,000 or so on a news site and 15,000 or so a month on LinkedIn ads and 15,000 on Google ads. Guess what came in?
Nothing. 0.
Absolute zero. There wasn't a relationship that was established. There was no trust. And I remember pulling together a bunch of IT buyers in front of a national sales meeting. I said, all right, you guys get to sit at this table. You all have mics. The sales team's going to ask you some honest and open questions. And one of the reps said, hey, of everything that I send to you, of all the content, the messaging, the tip sheets, what is it? What is the one thing that gets you to buy? And Larry, one of the people on the panel, said, I only believe like up to 10%, maybe 15% of what you're saying. I discount it all down to a pile, and I just think of it as noise. So if what we're doing is sending more content out and it's creating more noise, what's the one thing that gets somebody to move toward you? And Larry said, man, if I can talk to someone who's hired you and have an honest conversation, what was it like to hire Sergio? What came out of it? What about Dax? What came out of that? That's the story that people really want to hear. Is where were you? What was it like in the middle? And then what's the improvement that you've made? It's quite opposite from what we think in terms of messaging that really matters.
So if somebody's getting started online with online sales, and maybe they want to have a website set up, maybe they want to do stuff with social media, what do each of us kind of, I mean, what do you guys believe is something that they should kind of be aware of going into this that you wish you knew at the very beginning?
For me, I wish I knew that scripts weren't the way for closing deals on a call, and that fancy demos wasn't something that you really needed to do. It feels great to have this like perfect demo and script. I wish I had known that you could pause all that. It's valuable only if the buyer wants to see it. And I wish I had known that the let me show you my slides or demo was like the kiss of death, the breach of trust at the beginning of a call.
I love what you just said, Mark. For me, it was understanding or realizing it much later, but understanding the fact that the plan that you have in your mind is probably not going to work, and you can't put all your eggs in one basket. So if you are going to run one campaign for one audience with one message and be like, oh yeah, this is going to work, I have the next killer script, or I have the next ad that's going to perform, or I have the next post that's going to go viral, things don't often work like you plan, and ideas are often, they feel like, because they're personal, we value them much more significantly than what the market values it. And knowing that gap and being open to that, okay, I'm gonna have to do 100 of these things to find out the 5 or 10 topmost things that are actually gonna get me the results I want. So once you have that, then you don't get disappointed or hurt, or you're like mentally prepared, right? Okay, the next step after it, this is going to be version B, version C, version D, and so on and so on. So
Reiterating, evolving, just paying attention to what's working, what's not. It's to say, I feel like that's consistent across any channel, any industry. It's sticking with it for the long run and just being committed to learning as you go. If you're not learning, it's kind of insane. You know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping, for a different outcome. So the same thing applies for social media. Consistency and sticking with it for the long run. There's a lot more that I've learned today, because it's kind of it's compounding. It's like a snowball effect. The more knowledge you have, the quicker you can grab onto certain concepts and kind of understand, model things that work very well. So an example of this is I started a podcast 3 months ago. On average, 50 podcasts start every week, which is probably a lot more than that now. And I think about 90% of podcasts quit by the 4th episode or the 5th episode. The top 1% of podcasters makes up about 10 podcasts. So it's a very competitive space, and that's only one type of, or one form of content. I started a podcast 4 months ago, and I started in a place where I had a little bit more understanding of what it took to produce a podcast. Within the first 3 weeks, we got offered $3,000 or $5,000 for a guest to come on and just speak. A guest offered us money, which was something that was really shifted my entire perspective, because one, I kind of knew that would happen, but I would never think that would happen in 3 weeks. That's really incredibly rare. That never happens. Not never happens, but I mean, it takes a lot to make that happen. But it showed how the market and people will reward you for putting a lot of quality and intent behind what it is that you're putting out there. So staying with it, being consistent, sticking with it for the long run, learning, but really also just putting the most that you can into what you're sharing out there. It's like a journal. Imagine writing into a journal and not really giving it any thought, just writing random words and random feelings without any context around what happened, and then you share that with someone. It's like, what is it? No one connects with it. So your social media is almost like a public journal where people can see what's going on inside. They get to learn about you on a deeper level and connect with you as a person. And by the time they're on the sales call, there's a lot more trust that's built. I've been on calls with people where I already felt like I knew the person. They didn't know me, so they had to get to know me on the call as opposed to the other way around. And I've met with people who started a podcast, who were terrible hosts, stuck at asking questions, didn't listen. Clearly, I watched the episodes, they weren't paying attention, but because they have a podcast and they connect with the right people, they were able to, you know, drive some business revenue out of it. But the image of their brand online, it's not very. There's not a lot of trust that's being built. It's not attractive, and so you start to become dependent on just consistently booking guests as opposed to putting stuff out there that people resonate with and want to reach out to you and connect. So that shift takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. And if you really want to stand out, you got to be connected with your audience and kind of know what's going on and what's happening. That's one of the biggest challenges I've seen with a few clients in the past, is that they'll kind of hand everything off to the people doing the editing, and I mean, it works until it doesn't. You have to be connected. You have to understand where your audience is, what their needs are, and that takes time. It's building a relationship. Some of your best relationships were built over years, over time, and it takes time to build relationships online too.
Doesn't it feel good though to build the relationship really fast and be able to have everybody say yes?
Yeah, it does.
100%.
But how does it happen fast?
Well, it only happens in the natural cadence of somebody else's buying language, where they're going to observe you prior to the call, look at what you're talking about, and envision themselves working with you. And then the next test is, are you like that on a call? Are you true to the form of what you presented yourself to the world? And when that happens, it creates this, oh my God, I actually am excited to be here on this call. And then the rest of it becomes this checking the box of, wow, I could see myself joining calls with this person. I like their organization. They make me laugh. There's value here. If those things aren't happening, then you get this, I'm going to hope that this works again. I'm going to just step away, and then maybe I won't have wasted my time with that person and I'll want to join them again. So what they're kind of saying to you is, I might give you a second shot at this. I might not, but I want some personal space because I feel like you've been hitting me in the face with too much talk and I need a break.
Yeah,
How's
and
that
what does a
resonate?
break really mean?
A break might mean a permanent escape from talking with you ever again.
Basically
and
getting
people-
ghosted.
People by nature are polite, I feel. Most people are polite, and they try to be, very kind and not hurt people's feelings. And that sometimes doesn't help us as sales reps on calls. We need to understand what these different, things that would normally sound very nice and healthy. We need to understand what is behind them, and how to, kind of get through that, because it could be a fear from the prospect taking a step into getting help, or it could be a gap in the sale with the sales rep, maybe not saying something, or sharing something that just didn't land the right way. Those things are skill sets that I think take a lot of time to learn if you're doing it on your own. But if you have someone right by your side, a coach who has been through it and can spot the gaps, I mean, you're not just going to save yourself time, Dax. What else are you going to save yourself?
Oh, you're gonna save yourself a lot of money as
Yeah.
well, right? And that's why I say, right, instead of trying to do everything yourself, learn from the experts. If I want to learn how to build a podcast or grow my social media, I'm gonna go to Sergio. If I want to learn how to close more sales deals, I'm gonna call Mark. if I want to learn how to generate more leads, I'm going to call myself, right? But you want to have people who have done multiple things and they're good at it before trying to just hammer at it and be like, oh, why isn't anything working? And I believe that's the combination that we all bring together.
I agree. If you called yourself, what's like the first thing you would say to yourself?
If I called myself,
Well, you said you would call yourself if you needed more leads. What would you like say to yourself? What's the first thing you'd say or share?
oh boy, I feel like that's a whole different ball game, right? I have an entire process for how I run my sales and discovery calls, or how I even do lead generation and prospecting, right? You can't just call a random number and hope for it to work. So you have to be intentional, you have to do your research and make sure that you understand the person. But I like that. Maybe that can be the topic of our next conversation.
That feels right. And speaking about feeling right, we are at the end of our time together on today's live. We might have stimulated a question or an opportunity. If there is something that we mentioned that you want to learn more about, definitely add a comment and reach out, because our goal is to get you more people on calls that you go, wow, this one is someone I really want to serve. And also doing the things so that they move toward you rather than the traditional runaway. Thank you, everyone, for being on our live today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you, Mark.
Bye for now.